Page 62. Continued. He is comforted by the abbot and monks, whose life contemplative is very much appreciated by the king. His mood is drowsy and disillusioned. At this time, Raisa Powell comes up with a certain mower and the Earl of Leicester. The mower points out their fugitives, and Leicester tells them, quote, "The Queen's commission urged by Mortimer," unquote. He arrests Baldock and Spencer. Then Leicester asks the king that he must get into a litter, for he must be taken to the castle of Kenilworth. As he parts from his favourites, he bids pathetic farewell to his favourites. He asks Leicester to lay him in a hearse and carry him to hell. He prays to Pluto, god of death, to ring his death knell, and asks the female spirits to cry out his death. Charon will ferry him in his boat to the Hades across the Styx, Styx. Edward has lost all his friends except the two, Baldock and Spencer, who are also fated to die under the sword of Mortimer. This pathetic cry of Edward in his misery and helplessness stirs up pity for the unfortunate king, who now pays the penalty of his incompetence and weakness as a king. Quote, "The irony of kingship," unquote, has sunk deep in him, and he is resigned to his lot. His attitude of acceptance of his fate is pathetic rather than tragic. Notes: Pluto, king of Hades. Hags are evil spirits in female forms. Charon, Charon, boatman who takes away the dead across the Styx to the Hades. 28. The grief of private men are soon allayed, but not of kings, the forest deer being struck. Ellipsis, should drink his blood, mounts up to the in air. Act 5, Scene 1. Leicester, as the keeper of Edward in Kenilworth Castle, shows kindness and sympathy to Edward. He asks the king to take consolation from the thought that he is in this castle for his own pleasure. But the king is not consoled by this. The grief of a king is different from the grief of an ordinary man. The ordinary man is compared to a common deer of the forest. When a deer is wounded, he finds by instinct the herb and applies its juice to the wound, and thus heals the wound. An ordinary man, fallen in misery, finds consolation from the comforting words of his friends. But the king in distress is like a lion wounded by the hunter. He roars in pain and anger, rends and widens his own wound by his own paws, and tears his own flesh. He jumps up in the air as if out of scorn for the earth which drinks his blood. In his pain and misery he is still proud, and does not like lowly earth to be soaked with the royal blood. So also the king, distressed by misfortune, instead of being calmed by consoling words, becomes filled with the furious moods of defiance and desperation, and roars in anger for vengeance. Marlowe shows here the impotent rage of the king, even in his fall. He oscillates between a mood of calm resignation and a mood of fury and defiance. This highlights the misery of the king's downfall. But the vain rant and bombast of the king at this time of his misery and helplessness arouses pity for the king instead of scorn, as it does in the earlier scenes. The comparisons drawn from the animal world indicate the influence of the Renaissance, which shows the relationship of man with the animal. Montaigne. Moreover, the passage is highly poetic and relates Marlowe to Lily, L-Y-L-Y, who wrote Euphues, E-U-P-H-E-U-S. Notes: Private men, ordinary men. Imperial lion, lion who is royal. Gored, pierced. Wrathful paw, paw of the angry lion. Page 63, 29. But what are kings when regiment is gone? But perfect shadows in a sunshine day. May nobles rule, I bear the name of king. I wear the crown, but am controlled by them. Act 5, Scene 1. Edward is confined in Kenilworth Castle under the care of Leicester. Leicester tries to console him by asking him to imagine the castle as his court. The king at first compares his distress to that of the imperial lion, who, when wounded, roars in pain and anger. He is a king, and his misfortune goads him to defiance and desperation. He thinks of revenge on the Queen and Mortimer, who have brought him to this miserable condition. But next moment he lapses into helplessness and self-pity. He realizes that a king's strength is dependent on royal authority. When his authority is gone, he is nothing but a shadow cast by the bright sunlight on a clear day. He is as unsubstantial as a shadow. His nobles have the actual authority. He is a king in name. He is completely controlled by them, although he wears the crown. He now painfully realizes his position because his rule is now gone for his own inefficiency and negligence of royal duties. Edward is wiser in adversity than in the heyday of his power. He realizes that it is the right to rule that gives a king the power and authority. He has lost that right of rule by his own weakness and incompetence. The king in misery becomes more attractive for this wisdom than in prosperity. It is to be noted that his rant and bombast are followed by these words of despair and self-pity in the same speech addressed to Leicester. This emphasizes the helplessness and pathos of his situation. Notes: Regiment, rule. Perfect shadows means mere shadows as unsubstantial as shadows. 30. But if proud Mortimer do wear this crown, heavens turn it to a blaze of quenchless fire, or like the snaky wreath of Tisiphone, engirt the temples of his hateful head. Act 5, Scene 1. The king is confined in the Kenilworth Castle. The Bishop of Winchester and Trussell, Trussel, have come to take the crown from the king. The king is reluctant to yield up the crown because he does not want the, quote, usurping Mortimer, unquote, to become the King of England. The Bishop of Winchester assures the king that the crown is being craved for his son, Prince Edward, and for England's good. Edward bursts into an angry vituperation. He knows that Mortimer will be the real king. Prince Edward is a meek lamb surrounded by ravenous wolves. But he pronounces the curse that if Mortimer wears the crown on his head, the crown will be turned to a blaze of fire, which will burn the forehead of the vicious man, as the crown given by Medea to his rival Creusa burnt in awful flames, and the burning gold stuck to her head. Or the king wishes that the crown will torment the head of Mortimer, as the head of Tisiphone was tormented by the snakes that hung like hair from her head and encircled her head. In short, the king curses Mortimer, but The king curses Mortimer that he will never be happy with the wearing of the crown, which does not rightfully belong to him. Marlowe with superb art shows the, quote, reluctant pangs of abdicating royalty, unquote. Marlowe is essentially a poet of the Renaissance. The surfeit of classical allusions testifies to the influence of the Renaissance on Marlowe. Notes: a blaze of quenchless fire. The reference is to the crown sent by the enchantress Medea to Creusa, Creusa, for whom Jason deserted Medea. When Creusa put on the crown, it burnt and melted the gold that stuck to her head. Page 64. Tisiphone, one of the furies of hell. Snakes hung from her head like locks of hair and hissed furiously. 31. They pass not for thy frowns as late as they did, but seek to make a new elected king, which fills my mind with strange despairing thoughts, which thoughts are martyred with endless torments, and in this torment comfort find I none, but that I feel crown upon my head. Act 5, Scene 1. These lines occur in the famous speech of Edward expressing, quote, the reluctant pangs of abdicating royalty, unquote. He is forced to give up the crown, but he fondly clings to the crown. Taking off the crown from his head, he implores the commission to leave him king for the day, and fondly wishes that the sun may never set. He puts on the crown again and asks the men if they are frightened by the frowns of the king. But he comes to realize his sad mistake. The men do not now care for his mind with tormenting despairs. He declares that he is going to lose all power along with the crown, but finds some comfort so long as he feels the crown upon his head. These lines ring with the poetry of despairing self-pity. The pitiful agony of the king struggling with the pangs of deposition stirs up pity for the unhappy king. Marlowe the poet triumphs here over Marlowe the dramatist. 32. Make we despise this transitory pomp, and sit for aye enthronized in heaven. Come, death, and with thy fingers close my eyes, or if I live, let me forget myself. Act 5, Scene 1. These lines occur in the famous scene in Kenilworth Castle, where the king is forced to give up the crown. Quote, the reluctant pangs of abdicating royalty, unquote, are expressed in the ringing poetry of despairing self-pity. The king fondly clings to the crown. At one time, he wishes that he must abide by what the heavens appoint. Again, he implores the commission to leave him king for the day, and fondly desires that the sun may never set. He puts on the crown and bids the traitors be gone. He will not resign the crown. But again he calls them back on Leicester's advice, and with pathetic hesitation and overcome by the pity which he sees working in the hearts of the commission, he at last takes off the crown and gives it to them. He seems to be reconciled to the lot. He asks God to make him despise the earthly glory of wearing a crown. He wishes to be enthroned in heavenly glory by shedding all material desires and earthly pomp which is transitory. He calls upon death to come to him and close his eyes. If he lives, he likes to live in self-oblivion. These lines express the mood of calm resignation which comes to the king after the tempest of agony and despair and self-pity. The oscillation between desperation and calm resignation intensifies the pangs of deposition, which are so vividly portrayed by Marlowe with superb art. Here the king's sinks into a drowsy, helpless mood of resignation, which culminates in his death wish and self-forgetfulness. In his death wish and self-forgetfulness. 33. The prince I rule, the queen do I command, and with a lowly conge to the ground, the proudest lords salute me as I pass. I seal, I cancel, I do what I will. Page 65. Feared am I more than loved. Let me be feared, and when I frown, make all the court look pale. Act 5, Scene 4. Mortimer arranges for the murder of Edward. He contrives the murder in such a way that Edward and his murderer will be done away with. In a soliloquy, he gluts over his success. He is the protector now, and he is the real ruler of England. He rules the prince and commands the queen. The lords obey him and salute him with a low bow. He now has the supreme power to do what he pleases. He can give assent to a thing and cancel it. The courtiers are overawed by his mere frown. He knows that he is feared and not loved, but he exults over being feared by the courtiers. Here Mortimer reviews his success with a smug self-satisfaction. He has become a Machiavellian villain. A man of high ambition, he rejoices here in the fulfillment of his ambition. This self-glorification is an evidence of the degradation of character. 34. I view the prince with Aristarchus's eyes, whose looks were as a breeching to a boy. Act 5, Scene 4. Same as explanation number 33. Add, he looks at the prince with the severity of Aristarchus, Aristarchus. The pupils of Aristarchus were overawed by the severity of their teacher. So also the prince who is going to be crowned king is dominated by his authority. Just as Aristarchus's looks were a kind of whipping to his boys, so also Mortimer's authority was severe to the young prince. Notes: Aristarchus, a well-known Greek grammarian of Samothrace, who flourished about 150 BC. He founded a grammatical and critical school at Alexandria. He was known for his severity and sternness. Breeching is whipping. 35. Tell Isabel the Queen I looked not thus when for her sake I ran a tilt in France, and there unhorsed the Duke of Clermont, Cleremont. Act 5, Scene 5. Lightborn enters the Berkeley Castle, where Edward is confined. Edward understands that he has come to murder him. The villain weeps hypocritical tears. The king is a bit softened by this attitude to him. He complains to the rogue of his wretched condition. He has stood for 10 days in the sink of foul, stenching water, and has not had so much as a wink of sleep. He remembers his wife Isabella. The old Edward revives. The loving, passionate Edward returns at this moment of misery. He calls his wife as Isabel, the sweet name by which he used to call her when he courted her. He asks Lightborn to remember him to her and tell her that he had an attractive and handsome appearance when he courted her. He challenged his rival to her love in a tournament fight and threw him down by his skilful charge. The rival was the Duke of Claremont, whom he pulled down from his horse in the fight. These lines are beautiful in their sweet pathos. The simplicity of language and its unadorned beauty testify to the sincerity of the speaker's feelings. In his misery and misfortune, Edward has become gentle and full of courtesy. He remembers his old days of sweet association with his wife. He strikes a pathetic note in this recollection of his wife. The story related by him seems to be fictitious. Notes: ran at tilt is challenged my rival to her love in a tournament fight. The Duke of Claremont. The Duke was a suitor to Isabella. Page 66. Number 36. These looks of thine can harbour naught but death. I see my tragedy written in thy brows, yet stay awhile. Forbear thy bloody hand, and let me see the stroke before it comes, that even then I shall lose my life. My mind may be more steadfast on my God. Act 5, Scene 5. In the Berkeley Castle, Lightbourne, appointed by Mortimer to murder Edward, enters. Edward has an instinctive knowledge that he has come to kill him. Lightbourne sheds hypocritical tears. The king is a bit softened by his attitude and complains to him of his wretched condition. He has stood for 10 days in the sink of foul, stenching water and has not had so much as a wink of sleep. The villain plays his part well. He asks Edward to lie on the bed, which he spreads for him. The king, however, finds in the look of the man his own death. He says to him that his tragedy is written in his brows. To all the hypocritically smooth words of comfort and pity, Edward's answer is that the villain has surely come to murder him. He asks him to wait a little. He wants to see the stroke of murder before it comes to him. He wishes to fix his mind on God at the time of death. This instinctive sense of death intensifies the pathos of Edward's life. He has passed through a long period of physical sufferings and spiritual agony. Death is the climax of his misery and anguish. Marlowe has carried the audience through the mounting stages of passion and pathos to this last dread scene. He has stirred up considerable pity for the unhappy king. The king's final wish to repose his faith in God as he dies completes the sympathetic reaction in his favour. The poetry of the lines is marked by simplicity and lucidity. A note of sincerity rings through the lines. Notes: harbour means entertain. Tragedy written in thy brows. Your brows tell your purpose of killing me. Forbear means hold. Steadfast is fixed. Number 37. As for myself, I stand as Jove's huge tree, and others are but shrubs compared to me. All tremble at my name, and I fear none. Let's see who dare impeach me for his death. Act 5, Scene 6. The murder of Edward has been completed. Matrevis is afraid that Gournay may betray him. He runs away from the country. Mortimer is inspired to a false sense of security by the success of his plan. He is also blinded by inordinate ambition that nothing can harm him. He seems to be fortified in his position as protector of the young king. He is jubilant over his unshakable position and compares himself to the oak tree which is sacred to Jupiter, the supreme god of heaven and earth. Others in the realm are mere shrubs that grow under the oak's protecting shadow. They are afraid of him. He is confident that none will bring charge of murder against him. This speech by Mortimer shows the tragic hubris, hubris, of this arrogant man. His tragedy is imminent. There is danger in his sense of security. Quote, "Security is man's mortal enemy," unquote, Shakespeare says in Macbeth. His doom is suggested by his pride and self-complacency and self-glorification. The speech is therefore an example of dramatic irony. Notes: Jove's huge tree is the oak tree which the Romans consider sacred to Jupiter, the supreme god of heaven and earth. Impeach, accuse of high treason. Page 67. Number 38. Base fortune, now I see that in thy wheel there is a point, to which when men aspire they tumble headlong down. That point I touched, and seeing there was no place to mount up higher, who should I grieve at my declining fall? Act 5, Scene 6. Mortimer has been condemned to execution by the young King Edward III. Mortimer accepts his fate in a bold spirit of resignation. He realizes that there is a limit to fortune. The goddess of fortune turns her wheel. In that wheel there is the highest point, which indicates the acme of good fortune. When a man reaches there, his highest fortune is attained, and then the point descends lower. Mortimer has attained the highest point of his fortune, and so now he goes speedily down. This is the law of force, and so he takes his downward descent as a matter of course. There is nothing unusual in it. Mortimer remains arrogant even in his death. He goes to the land of death as voyager and discoverer. Marlowe makes Mortimer an embodiment of the Renaissance spirit of his own age. The imagery of the wheel is a classical one. This also indicates the influence of the Renaissance on Marlowe. Notes: Fortune, ellipsis, wheel. The goddess of fortune turned a wheel, giving good fortune and misfortune to each man. Cross-reference, As You Like It. Quote, "Let us sit and mock and good housewife fortune from her wheel." Unquote. The conception is classical. Short objective questions and answers. Question number 1. What kind of play is Edward II? Answer. Edward II is a historical play. It is history well presented and well dramatized. Question number 2. What is the main source of Marlowe's Edward II? Answer. The sources of Marlowe's Edward II are Holinshed's Chronicle and the Chronicles of Fabian and Stowe. Fabian, Fabian, Stowe, Stowe. Question number 3. Which character of the play Edward II is Marlowe's own? Answer. Kent is the creation of Marlowe's imagination. He is the brother to King Edward. He discovers the guilty love of Isabella for Mortimer. Question number 4. What is the position of the play Edward II in Marlowe's dramatic career? Answer. In Edward II, Marlowe shows his dramatic workmanship. Here he dramatizes history and develops the plot coherently with a variety of characters interacting. His earlier plays were one-man shows and the structure was loose. Here, Marlowe shows his power of developing the play by distributing interest over a variety of characters. Question 5. Mention some historical plays written before Edward II. Answer. Earlier historical plays are King Johann, the famous victories of Henry V, the troublesome reign of King John. Question number 6. Is Edward II a chronicle play or a historical play? Is Edward II a chronicle play or a historical play? Answer. A chronicle play is a dramatic work based on the historical materials in the English chronicles by Holinshed and others. Edward II, in this respect, is a chronicle play. Chronicle plays are historical plays, but the term historical play is applied to any drama based on historical materials. Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra are also historical plays.